Hey everyone, welcome to another video. So in this video, we'll try and understand all about pre-deposits under GST. So we'll break this video into two parts. One, of course, is going to be on why you need pre-deposits. Actually, what are pre-deposits under GST and why you need them. And number two, what is the basic calculation methodology involved with pre-deposits and what are the issues involved in this calculation. So let's do a deep dive into this particular video and first and foremost try and understand why do you need pre-deposits under GST. Well, initially when you get an order from the GST Appellate, order from the GST department, if you want to contest that particular order, the resolution that is available for you is to file an appeal before the GST, the first level, that is Appellate authority. But before you do that, there are two requirements that you need to fulfill. Firstly, you need to pay the full amount of the undisputed GST liability. That is the amount of liability that you're not contesting or disputing. And number two, pay 10% of the disputed GST liability as pre-deposit under the first level. Now, only if you fulfill these two requirements will you be able to file an appeal before the first level, which is the Appellate authority. So 10% is a pre-deposit of the disputed GST liability in the first case. Now, suppose the Appellate authority issues an order and against this particular order is not in your favor and you want to seek a resolution, you file an appeal and contest this order before the GST Appellate authority, which is the Tribunal constitution, which is constituted in 2025. Again, before you file an appeal here, there are two basic requirements that you need to fulfill. Number one, whatever is the GST amount that you have admitted, pay the full value, that is, pay the full amount of admitted GST liability. And number two, whatever is the disputed GST liability, pay 10% as pre-deposit. So in the earlier level, you had pre-deposit of 10% at the first Appellate level. At the second level also, when you file an appeal before the GST Appeal Tribunal, you also have to pay 10% of the disputed GST liability as a pre-deposit. So to conclude, if you look at it, there is 10% in the first level and 10% in the second level. So a combined 20% is a pre-deposit of the disputed GST liability that you have to pay before you pay to the department, before you go for an appeal, and finally when you have to hear before the GST Appellate Tribunal. Now, if you really look at this, 20% is a substantial amount because large businesses, if you look at it, you get a lot of GST demand. The GST demand is pretty high. It could be 10 crores, 20 crores, 30 crores, 40 crores and so on. 20% of that is a substantial amount of money and that is a lot of cash outflow. If you look at capital intensive businesses having heavy machinery and all that, even for them an order under GST would entail a big amount of, let's say, 10, 20, 30, 40, 60 crores, whatever. And therefore paying 20% as pre-deposit, 10% the first level, 10% second level, paying 20% pre-deposit will have a lot of issues to their working capital requirements and liquidity will also be an issue in this particular case. So therefore, what are the issues in pre-deposit? So now we will look into the main body of this particular video and try and understand, okay, we have right now understood what are pre-deposits and why do you need pre-deposits? Well, you need pre-deposits to sort of avoid frivolous cases under GST. You only would entertain serious disputes which should go to the appeal level, and therefore the objective of having the concept of pre-deposits is to only entertain serious disputes under GST. So what are the main issues with respect to pre-deposit? Well, to understand this, we'll take two examples and then understand the calculations being involved. The first one is a case where, for example, let's say you got an order, the first order that you receive under GST, and that is for rupees 10 crores. Now, against this particular order, you want to contest this order and therefore you file an appeal against this particular order to the first level, that is Appellate authority. You end up paying the first pre-deposit of 10% of 10 crores, which comes around 1 crore rupees. Now, let's say this appellate authority releases an order, and again in this particular order, it is not in your favor and the disputed GST liability still remains to be 10 crores. And against this, you want to file an appeal before the GST Appellate Authority. At this stage, you have to again pay 10% as pre-deposit. Now, here one important thing to understand is that although the law states that 10% should be the pre-deposit in the first level, that is when you go to the appellate authority, and 10% when you go to the GST Appellate Tribunal, for the purpose of calculation, you calculate 20% of the disputed GST amount. In this case, 20% of 10 crore, which amounts to 2 crore rupees. And from that amount, you reduce the pre-deposit that you already paid in the first instance, which is 1 crore. So only the remainder of 1 crore rupees is what you have to pay as pre-deposit at the second level. So 20% of the disputed tax amount, which remains to be 10 crore, it's 2 crores, minus 1 crore already paid as pre-deposit in the first level. The remaining 1 crore is what you have to pay to the GST department before you go for the appeal before the GST Appellate Tribunal. Example number 1. Example number 2, let's take a case where you got an order under GST, the initial order, and that is again rupees 10 crores. You want to fight this and therefore you file an appeal before the appellate authority, the first level, for which you have to mandatorily deposit 10% of 10 crores, which amounts to 1 crore rupees. Now, let's say this appellate authority releases an order, but this time, in this particular order, there are two divisions. One, it says 6 crores is what the appellate authority admits or accepts your replies and says that, okay, 6 crore I'm going to accept. The remaining 4 crore still remains as the undisputed GST liability. So what the appellate authority order says is that out of 10 crores, 4 crores is the undisputed GST liability. So what do? You still want to contest this and therefore you go for the application for filing an appeal before the GST Appellate Tribunal. Now in this case, like I said before, for the purpose of calculation, you look at 20% of the disputed amount of GST at the time when you file an appeal second, that is at the time when you file an appeal before the GST Appellate Tribunal. So 20% of 4 crore comes to around 80 lakhs minus what you've already paid as pre-deposit in the previous level, which is 1 crore, and 80 lakhs minus 1 crore, that is negative 20 lakhs is the pre-deposit. In effect, there's no pre-deposit that you have to pay at the second level before you go for the GST Appellate Tribunal. So 20% of the disputed tax amount at that time when you're filing an appeal before the GST Appellate Tribunal minus what you've already paid. In this case, 80 lakhs minus 1 crore, that is minus 20 lakhs, you end up paying nothing to the GST department before you file an appeal before the GST Appellate Tribunal. Now let's say it is 6 crore, which is the disputed tax amount. So 6 crore into 20% is 1.2 crore minus 1 crore that you already paid. 20 lakhs is what you have to pay to the department before you file an appeal to the GST Appellate Tribunal. So in effect, the golden rule here is, as far as calculation is concerned, number 1, you look at 20% of the disputed GST liability at that point in time when you're ready to file an appeal before the GST Appellate Tribunal, minus 1 crore is the pre-deposit that you already paid in the first level. If there's anything remaining, you pay the remaining amount to the GST department and go for the second appeal before the GST Appellate Tribunal. Now, if you look at it, just to understand some more points here. 1, as far as a GST order is concerned, one thing to be kept in mind is that only if you are going for an appeal against this order would you have to pay a pre-deposit. If against this order, the department is filing an appeal, there is no question of any pre-deposit. So only against an order for which becomes not in your favor and you want to go for an appeal, then would you prefer when you have to pay a pre-deposit. Otherwise, if the department is taking your case and then going and filing an appeal against the order which came in your favor, there's no concept of pre-deposit when the department goes and files an appeal against the order. Number 1. Number 2, if for the purpose of paying off this pre-deposit, whether at level 1 or level 2, you can, of course, you can use the cash lying in your electronic cash ledger. But more than that, you can use whatever whatever GST credits lying in your electronic credit ledger on the GST portal. Now, this is supported by several Supreme Court case laws which says that for a taxpayer to pay pre-deposit at the time of filing an appeal, you can very well use the balance in the electronic credit ledger lying on your GST portal and then extinguish and pay the full pre-deposit. So there is no problem regarding utilization of the balance input tax credit lying in your electronic credit ledger. Number two. Number three, the point that you should remember here is that before 1st October 2025, any appeal filed prior to 1st October 2025, your pre-deposit was 10% of the disputed tax interest only. But for any appeal filed after 1st October 2025, regardless of when the order was received, for any appeal filed after October 25, your 10% of the pre-deposit amount is equal to 10% of tax, interest, and even penalty. So the only change here is that penalty before was not there, after October 25, it is very much there. So therefore, if you look at the GST Act on one side, the Act has provisions which state that, look, you need to pay 10% pre-deposit at the first level and 10% pre-deposit on the second level. That is only what the Act says. The GST portal on the other side is pretty weak technically as far as calculation of the 20% is concerned. It does not currently calculate 20%. It's a wait and watch kind of situation. We'll have to see how the portal evolves to help the calculation. But currently, the GST portal does not have a technical way of calculating 20% of the pre-deposit amount minus setting off the initial pre-deposit amount. That calculation is not there on the GST portal. So therefore, you can rely on the interpretation or what truly the law says in this particular case, wherein you have to calculate 20% of the pre-deposit amount minus the pre-deposit amount at the initial stage. So GST Act is there on one side, GST portal is there on the other side. Both are not talking about this 20% calculation setting off of the early pre-deposit. You look at what the law truly says, interpret it, and then follow this particular calculation. So this video is useful for all those who don't want to end up paying a lot of GST a lot of money as pre-deposit. It is important to understand what truly the law wants you to calculate and then pay off. So avoid paying a lot of money and manage your cash flows. Well, I hope I was able to make things clear in this particular video. If you like the video, you could show support to us by hitting the like button. If you want more videos of these on regular basis through way of notifications, you could also think of hitting on the subscribe button. Till then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care and thank you.